Welcome to the Sober Living Stories podcast. This podcast is dedicated to sharing stories of sobriety. We shine a spotlight on individuals who have faced the challenges of alcoholism and addiction and are today living out their best lives sober. Each guest has experienced incredible transformation and are here to share their story with you. I'm Jessica Stepanovic, your host. Join me each week as guests from all walks of life share their stories to inspire and provide hope to those who need it most. Welcome to another episode of the Sober Living Stories podcast. I'm excited to introduce our guest, David J. Greer, an entrepreneurial coach and author. With over 40 years of experience, including co-owning a global software startup, he's now helping individuals turn dreams into reality. David specializes in guiding entrepreneurs who have faced alcoholism or addiction to thrive. Stay tuned for an inspiring conversation. Welcome, David. I'm so glad to have you on the show today.
Thanks, Jessica. I'm really excited to be here.
Could you share your journey as an entrepreneur and explain how addressing your own drinking problem has positively resulted in helping other entrepreneurs succeed?
Sure. So, let me start at the beginning. So I was conceived in Calgary, born in Edmonton, because it was teenage pregnancy and my mom was sent to home for unwed moms and was immediately relinquished for adoption. And I was adopted into an upper middle class family as the first child. And then my sister was adopted 3 years later, and 3 years after that, my mom got pregnant with our brother. I mentioned that partly because my father took over my grandfather's business that he started in 1923 in Market Square in downtown Edmonton. And it was a wholesale sanitary supply business. So I come from a family of entrepreneurs. Okay. So it's very normalized. I also don't think my parents were alcoholics, but they were daily drinkers. Like Dad, traditional, come home from work at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, pour a scotch and soda for him and a gin and tonic for Mom. And, they'd sit down and visit for a bit, and then we'd all sit down as a family for dinner. Very kind of traditional. I became a daily drinker. So I think part of that is just, again, I don't think they were alcoholic, but I had that modeled for me. Sure. So I'm going to talk more about the entrepreneurial journey to start, and then more where alcohol came into play. Okay, because I think the entrepreneurial part came first. I was an academic jock geek in high school, and went to keg parties with the football team and drank after basketball games. But I didn't drink between those times, and I would pretty heavy binge drinking, on weekends or those parties. But when I was in grade 9, I got taken on a tour of the so Edmonton is the provincial capital of the province of Alberta, and got taken on a tour of like a government IT department. And I was completely entranched by spinning tape drives and like computer room. And also that year I was taught octal arithmetic, like we have 10 digits, which is why we count to 10. But you can use any base. You can use 8, you can use 16. So I don't want to get too technical. I said I'm a techie geek. And like from grade 9, I knew I wanted to take computers and business and put them together.
It was just a match. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I knew that I wasn't going to be able to do it in the wholesale sanitary supply business. Right. So later I had a lot of pressure from my dad to take over the business, and that wasn't on. So I also happened to go to one of the few high schools in Edmonton with a data processing department teacher. Great. So I went to one term at the University of Alberta, and then I was in love. My girlfriend from high school had moved to Vancouver. And so I quit school and I moved out to Vancouver, where
Okay.
9 months later, my girlfriend broke up with me.
Oh,
Uh,
but you got to Vancouver.
but I got to Vancouver and I worked for 18 months. And I did go back to school. I went to
Hmm.
UBC to get my computer science degree. I asked my spouse out after a chemistry lab in first
Hmm.
year, and she said yes. That was 46 years ago, last November.
Oh, wow.
And
Congratulations.
we've been married 41 years. Thank you very much.
Hmm.
So all of this is precursor. So I'm going to university. I'm on the rugby team. I'm drinking weekends. Rugby team is a great place to drink with, but my drinking hasn't progressed.
Hmm.
And my travel in alcoholism is very much the progressive nature of the disease.
Okay. Hmm.
And then a friend of mine introduced me to the IT manager of the local cable company, which is the biggest in North America at the time. And
Hmm.
its systems were on a small, very new mini computer, very innovative, but it wasn't working, and they'd hired a consultant to help rewrite it. And I did that for a couple of years, like all full time this summer and part time.
Okay.
And that consultant started a software company. And when I
Okay.
first met him, he introduced me to this really cool product that I didn't know anything about the computing platform. I had no idea what he was talking about. I was
Hmm.
completely bamboozled. Um,
Yeah.
and it was a fellow and his wife, Robert and Annabelle. And so they
Hmm.
named the company Robel, named for the two of them.
Okay. Combination.
And it's a made up name, so Google's well. And in fourth year, I agreed to go to join them as their first employee.
Okay.
And
Getting in right on the bottom.
right on the ground floor.
Right.
And now, Bob knew my work ethic and knew what I could do and what I was capable
Hmm.
of, because we had worked together for at least 18 months, 20
Hmm.
months on like rewriting this really major application.
Right.
Right. So he was the lead, but I did a lot of the grunt work and stuff
So
underneath.
had you graduated from college at this point, or was
No,
this during your
I
college?
have not. I'm in fourth year
Okay.
of a 4 year degree. And I had to tell my profs that winter that I was going to. So a condition of my employment is I had to submit an abstract to the 1980 Hewlett Packard International User Group Convention.
Okay.
And if it was accepted, I had to write the paper and go present it. So that was a
Okay.
condition of my employment. Um,
Okay.
and I wrote the abstract. It was accepted. I did write the paper, and I had to go to my props and let them know I was taking a week off to go fly to this user group meeting
Hmm.
and
And
uh,
present.
and present. And I remember like
Hmm.
standing on the side of the stage and just, I don't know if I was externally shaking, but internally,
Internally.
uh, I
I can
was
imagine.
really.
That's a big deal. Yeah.
I'm 22, right?
Right.
And
Right.
I've taken one public speaking course, but I've done almost no public speaking.
Right.
Um, and I gave that paper and presentation, um, which was a strategy that Bob and I pursued for 20 years. Like we wrote a paper every year, and then we traveled the
Hmm.
world giving presentations to managerial and technical audiences to create
Hmm.
belief in this small Vancouver-based software company you were going to trust your whole business to.
Right. Got it.
And that's how we created trust and belief in the company. Now, at that convention, one of the nights they had like a big dinner,
Hmm.
free wine. And I tried to match this Hungarian fellow in drinking wine at dinner
Oh
and
no. Yeah.
got
Hmm.
really pissed, and then like walking back to the hotel, a car with a couple girls of the night pulled up and ended
Hmm.
up pickpocketing me, and then
Hmm.
and so, alcohol is kind of already, it could have
Playing a
happened to me even
toll.
if I wasn't drunk, but
Yeah.
um,
If we could just pause there for a minute, because as you're saying this, I'm just thinking of a big time in my life where I waited a long time to go to something in Washington, D.C., and a similar situation happened where you're there for something very important that you've waited for, and alcohol comes in and kind of deters the mission, and
mhm.
you would never imagine, but it does, so
Yeah.
go ahead and continue. Yeah.
And a couple of years later, like Bob and I hosted, it was in Washington, so this Hewlett Packard user group had a conference every year. And I think around 85, it was in Washington, D.C. And we hosted a really big party, like for a couple hundred, 250 people, all clients of ours. And I had already figured out, like we had one or two other staff members who came. We weren't very big at that point. But I remember asking them to like just keep replenishing me with water, because I had noticed that at these kind of events, I just like drank continuously.
So you were realizing and recognizing that there was like, a little bit of abnormality in your drinking. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Not that I was going to, it turns out not that I was going to do anything about it, but I did have the wherewithal to like recognize that I had this pattern.
Right.
And so, we continued building the business. Carolee and I continued building our life. At what point did I become a pickle? I don't know exactly when I became a pickle, but I can tell you that in 1989, Carolee got pregnant with our first child, Jocelyn, and she committed to quitting drinking for the pregnancy. And I committed to stopping drinking to support her.
Right.
And that lasted 24 hours.
24 hours. So can you explain to listeners that don't know what your pickle reference is?
So in recovery, we talk about the point where, so once a cucumber becomes a pickle, and my wife actually loves to pickle cucumbers and make dill pickles as it happens. But once you become a pickle, you can't go back to being a cucumber. And so what we say in recovery is that there comes a point where you are so beholden to the alcohol, like you can never go back to drinking normally.
Right. And physically, brain chemistry, like physically. And exactly. You cross over that line.
You cross over that line.
About.
Right. And, for me, there's two attributes that makes me identify as an alcoholic. Okay. So the first is, if I pick up the first drink, I don't know what the nth drink will be. Okay. Like, will it be 3? Will it be 10? Will it be 15?
Right.
I don't know. Like, so once I put alcohol in my body just keeps wanting to put more into it. And then I have a mental problem in that the next time I think about picking up a drink, I completely forget about the last time, which was usually for 20 years, I was a daily drinker. So it was the previous day. Right. Thinking that somehow it'll be different today. Oh, I'll only have 3.
It's like that forgetter. So that yes. We forget. And that initiation of craving that happens, an obsession of the mind, and then it goes into craving. And then it, what do they say? One is too
many, 100's not enough.
Right. Correct.
Is the way I've heard it said. I don't know about 100, but 20.
Right.
Right. Towards the end, I was probably close to that, on a daily basis.
Sure.
And then 2 years later, Carolee got pregnant with her second child, and I don't even think I pretended to quit for Kevin. And then a couple of years after that, so back to being an entrepreneur. So Bob and Annabelle were the founders of Robel. We built it up. Was actually they hired one other person the same month they hired me, and the 4 of us actually built the business for 5 years without anyone else. And we grew revenue about 25% a year, which is quite a remarkable feat. I now know. Okay. But in 1991, Annabelle wanted to retire. And I was offered the chance to buy her shares, which was going to take all of the capital that we'd saved over the previous 5 or 8 years as a down payment. And then I had to pay her quarterly payments. And if I missed one, she could claim all the shares back, which is a fairly standard deal, but it's very high stress. And I came out of an accountant's meeting, working on the planning for that with tears streaming down my face. I'm like 34. I've got kids 4 and 2,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I'm going to take this on. But I went ahead with it. And then, I'm now a co-owner of this company. And like now I've arrived. Now I'm a big shot. And by the way, I've been drinking all this time, right? So,
Okay.
but now I like have even more excuses to drink.
Right.
And and uh and so it continues on. But I use alcohol to power up the highs higher, to make the lows not quite so low.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Manage the stress. A
yeah,
lot of
man,
success, maybe a lot of stress too. Yeah.
a lot of it's self-induced. I've since learned, since I got sober and
Mm-hmm.
done a lot of personal work.
Sure.
I'm a perfectionist, but I'm also a high-performing alcoholic. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
everyone around me was completely surprised I was an alcoholic.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, like
Yes, I can relate to that as well. I
didn't
remember that saying,
didn't
"Are you sure?"
stumble, didn't slur words. Like, I was like a man because I could drink a lot and hold it.
Right. But you
Right.
knew, like you at that point, you knew internally that you did have a drinking
Mm,
problem that needed to be addressed.
I think in my heart of hearts I did, but there was no way I was in denial for the longest time.
Sure. Okay.
So
Okay.
I think my innermost self knew that, but I wasn't
Mhm.
in any way willing to admit it.
Not yet. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. It was still going to come. It's still going to be a while, actually.
Yeah.
Um, so fast forward to the end of 2000, Bob and I have a major disagreement on the future of the company.
Mhm.
We can see like the end of this computing platform we specialized in. We don't know exactly when the end is going to come, but it's coming. And Bob wants to like milk the market till the last customer leaves and turn out the light. And I'm like, we've built this incredible team. We do things that most software vendors never can do. I want to take a little more risk, a little more money, and move it in new directions. And I
Okay.
think each
Mhm.
strategy was viable. They were not complementary.
Okay.
And Bob and I got into a very major, as I like to tell people, Bob and I had one major disagreement in 20 years and it ended in divorce.
Right.
So he ended up in 2001. One, we had a very acrimonious time. Like he, very emotional emails and blaming me for things that I'd never done. And,
Mhm.
from
Yeah.
afar. So, he'd moved to the Caribbean island of Anguilla. We were many time zones and miles apart. We just grown apart, I think is really
Hmm.
what had happened. Um, but he solved it we settled the disagreement by him ending in the end buying me out. So I'm on the
Okay.
street in early 2001, and I haven't noticed this thing called the dot-com meltdown. So I'm
Right.
trying to chase deals, but this is not a good time to chase deals. And someone I got introduced to who helped senior executives find new positions. She took me to lunch, and then we went to her office, and she sat me down. She said, "David, the kids will never be 11, 9, and 5 again." And she said, "Do you need to work right away?" And then she said, when
Wow.
I had a career break like yours, I went to Australia and I bought a VW van and I drove around for a year.
Wow.
And
Hmm.
if your listeners can imagine the most cartoonish light bulb going off over my head with the
You know, I
words, aha.
right. So it's like someone gave you permission to jump in and reset in a different way that honored your family.
Yes.
Wow. And
And
that just recently happened to me.
oh,
Same
cool.
words, similar sentence, just a complete light bulb moment, 8, 11, 18. you
Hmm.
know? So I can relate to that. Very
And
grateful for that person, huh?
oh, I
what
am
did
massively. So
and what
let
did
me
that
tell you. So let me
yeah,
tell you
what
what
did that
happened.
result in for you? I can't wait to hear.
So I've been a sailor growing up. My parents had a cabin on Pigeon Lake, which is south and west of Edmonton. We had owned boats since the year I graduated from university.
Mhm.
We'd owned a couple different sailboats, over a 20-year period. Our kids had grown up on sailing, like, weeks and weeks every summer on the boat or weeks and weekends.
So
And so
very comfortable on the water.
we commissioned a sailboat in the south of France, and we took our 3 kids and we homeschooled them for 2 years. while
Wow. Yay.
sailing more than 5,000 miles in the
Well, that's
Mediterranean.
incredible.
It's the most amazing legacy we have as a family.
That's wonderful. That is wonderful. So
And
your life went that way. So talk a little bit about that and then
yeah.
yeah.
So I got to tell you, the Mediterranean is a fantastic place to be an alcoholic. Uh, Beer costs about half what it costs in Canada because we're very taxed alcohol. Um,
Hmm.
or wine costs about half, beer about 2/3. Every port you pull into has a shoreside restaurant or three or four that
Hmm.
serves cold beer on tap.
Hmm.
My alcoholism continued on full bore. Uh, but a couple of things happened. One was we did a lot of the Med looks small in a world globe, but it's actually quite big when you can only travel at 7 miles an hour. Like, so
Right.
it takes a long
Sure.
time to get anywhere. So we'd like explore an area, then we'd like do very long, like 24 or 48 or 72-hour passages, like
Okay.
continuous, like
Okay.
day and night.
Hmm.
Um, and on our second overnight passage, which was a little more than a day and a half across the Western Mediterranean Sea, so you think kind of the part underneath France and Italy in
Hmm.
the Med. Uh, my son Kevin, who was 10 at the time, was on watch with me uh, in the middle of the night, and as far as we could see above us was the Milky Way,
Okay.
and we kept mistaking stars on the horizon for the lights of boats, like it was that clear. And
Okay.
And I think it was once I got sober, I really went back to that experience because I really think it was the universe really trying to touch me.
Wow.
Um,
Hmm.
but I didn't know it at the time, although I did really appreciate and understand the magic of it in the moment.
Sure.
And in that particular moment, I was sober because of the 20-25 overnight passages that we did. I never
Hmm.
drank on any of them. And I
Wow.
didn't even think about not drinking. Like the lives of
Just
my
did not.
family was at stake.
Yeah,
And
you'd mentioned you were a high performance alcoholic in business, and I was
mhm.
just going to ask, did that travel over to your family when you were on a break? How does that
Well,
transfer over where
to some
you're
extent, you
caring for
have,
your family?
yeah,
you
and you
know,
still have to be hyper. Like you can't believe the number of roles that you live as parents and
sure,
sailors, because you
sure.
got to be navigator, you got to be like mechanic, you got to be engineer, you got to be
Hmm.
stores supply, like just getting food for 5 people, including two just about well, one became a teenager,
Hmm.
and they were big, fast-growing kids, so like you needed
Sure,
a lot of food. Just getting the food on board, cooking it every day, and then the whole homeschooling piece. So
sure.
like it's flat out, and obviously we and I had other cruisers who'd meet us up with times to remind me that the adventure of our travels was schooling, and we
Hmm.
should just kind of back off a little on the formal schooling sometimes and just have play days. And so
Yeah,
we started doing more of that,
yeah. That's wonderful. I love that. Hmm.
and just um, sitting at anchor for a week and maybe not having any school and just going swimming every day.
Right.
And well, and I'm married to a very high performing individual. Like she's a physiotherapist, and she started her own physio clinic and had the biggest physio clinic in the west side of Vancouver, which she
Uh-huh.
sold just before this trip so she could spend time with the
Wow.
kids. 'Cause we had three
Uh-huh.
kids and two businesses. Like it really was
It's
great.
a lot. That's a lot. That's a
It,
lot.
um, but I had all these passages where I didn't drink.
Hmm.
And again, I did note that and I journaled about it, but it wasn't enough to like want to stop. Like as soon as we got back to shore, the first way I'd celebrate, no matter what time it was to
Was
open a
with a
beer.
with a drink. Hmm.
Yeah, of course. How else would you celebrate?
Right. Right.
Uh, so came back from that trip in 2003, and then for 3 years I was an angel investor. So I invested in young startups, and was on boards of directors and worked for
Hmm.
options. And I didn't realize like, it was just completely unfulfilling work. Most of the
Wow.
people were just, they were where I was when I was 24, 25, like a couple years into the business. Like we grew the
Sure.
business so fast, we learned things so fast that, and I'd accumulated so much knowledge over the years, mostly by the seat of our pants.
Hmm.
And I found that it took like a year to bring a CEO up one rung of the ladder. It was just,
Wow.
I didn't have that much patience. So I took one of my young CEOs to an event by a guy by the name of Vern Harnish, and he has something called the one-page strategic plan. And a lot of my technology entrepreneur friends in Vancouver swore by this one-page strategic plan.
Oh,
And
okay.
so I went to educate this young CEO, but also for myself,
Hmm.
which I did. And part of Vern's stuff, what makes it so different is that you start by looking at 3 or 5 years and like, where do you want to be? Where will your markets be in 3 to 5 years?
Okay.
And coming up with the 4 or 5 like key capabilities and thrusts that you need to move into in that time frame. Then you work backwards to what you want to do next year or like this year. And then you work
Right.
backwards to what do you want to do this quarter. And
Okay.
we grow Rulebell the kind of way a lot of entrepreneurs do. We'll do what we did last year and we'll do a little bit better this year,
Hmm.
but not very strategic. I mean,
Right.
towards the end, Bob and I became much more strategic about the business. And hey, we made a lot of money. We were massively successful. You know, um, but I wonder if we had used the one-page strategic plan all the way along, what we might have
Achieved.
achieved
Yeah.
and done.
Hmm.
But what was really important was in the back of the room were two business coaches. I went and talked to two of them, or to both of
Hmm.
them, and one of them, Coach Kevin Lawrence, made me more uncomfortable than I had been in a lot of years. And
Hmm.
he looked around and I didn't realize how unfulfilled I was till I had the conversation with him. And I had tears in the corners of my eyes. And
Hmm.
I think he just did a simple statement. There's about 100 people in the room, and he just looked around. He said, "David, there's like 100 people here, and every one of them needs your help." And I'd been trying to find people I could help for like 3 years.
Right.
And anyways, I took his card and I took it home, and it sat next to my phone. And about once a week, I'd look at it, and then I look at the phone, and the phone weighed at least 10,000 pounds.
Right.
And then 3 weeks later, Kevin called me,
He
and
called you.
he called
Okay.
me. He said, "Hey, do you remember me from the Vern Harnish event?" And I
Mm.
said, "Yes." Meanwhile, I don't tell him like, "Oh, I haven't thought about much else for the last 3 weeks," but
Right.
yeah,
Right.
I do remember you.
Right.
And I hired him on my 50th birthday, August 9th, 2007.
Wow.
And when you worked with Kevin at that time as a one-on-one client of his, your opening coaching session was 16 hours, 2 8-hour
Oh,
days.
wow.
Kevin is my kind of guy. Like,
Right.
you're all in or
Right.
you're all out.
That's all in
Like
immediately.
there is no in between whatsoever. And I had to agree to pay him for 16 hours, and he charged a lot.
Right.
Um, so we started a 9-year relationship of working
Okay.
together as his is my coach and me as his client. But 18 months after we started working together, we had like cleared away pretty well all the clutter, right? And cleared off the
Hmm.
table and like kind of all the things. And we got me sort of started in something, although it was still kind of working for upside, not getting any salary. Um,
Hmm.
and then on January 26, 2009, I took and drank my last beer, which I'd kind of about 10:30 at night. And I
Hmm.
carefully kind of planned that. And I made sure there was no other beer in the house.
Right.
And the way I worked with Kevin was I was to send to him like the topic for the next, like send him the topic for the next day's coaching session. So I had a
Okay.
coaching session in the morning with him the next day, which was the Tuesday, January 27th. And we had a coaching session. Oh, and I wrote the email. I said the topic for tomorrow's coaching session is my drinking.
Wow. And what do you think in the days following up to that last beer? What was going on inside of you that you were
I got
addressing
sick
this
and tired
now?
of being sick and tired of being sick and tired. Like it just, I just, I just
Like what
got
did
to
that look like for you? Like what did you being sick and tired look like?
I just conceding defeat. I'm just
Mhm.
like, this, and it's like the, you know, I would didn't my version of alcoholism like is you don't drink in the morning, otherwise you'd be an alcoholic, right? So,
Right. Right.
um, I used to be I didn't start drinking till 4:30 or 5, and then
Mhm.
in the previous year working with Kevin, that time kept coming down till
Sure.
like now it was like 3 o'clock.
Yeah. And you
And
talked about it early on, the progression. Yours is more about the
yes,
progression.
absolutely.
Mhm.
And and just the sheer amount of work, like making sure, you got to go. The amount I drank, you need to go to the liquor store 3 or 4 times a week,
Yeah.
like just to get it in and out of the house. It's actually harder to get the
Mhm.
empties out than it is to get the full ones in. But I go to 4 different liquor stores in a week because it's the same people saw
Yes.
me. What would they think?
Sure.
Like
It's a
it's
lot of
crazy.
work.
It's crazy. Like clearly, I must be thinking I'm an alcoholic, but
Right.
I don't admit it. I'm still in denial.
Right. It's an incredibly complex, right.
Oh,
And I mean, and you're just talking about like going out to the store and going to the different stores, but the mental capacity and space that takes too. So just imagine when that's gone, how
yes,
much more
yeah,
time you have to focus on what matters.
and a bunch of red lines. Like I'll never drink in the car. Then
Mm,
I'll never drink in
finally.
the car when it's moving.
Right.
Then I won't have more than one beer while the car is moving. And like going down to the beach and having 3 tall cans to like because I've been in an event downtown all day to like preload before I get home because I know I can't go in
Correct.
my
Yeah.
office and like have a bunch and I was super expert at hiding it, right?
Yeah.
Both in the
That's a lot
house.
of work. It's
Oh,
exhausting.
it's
The
it's
plan, yeah.
exhausting.
And it's the planning and just the dishonesty. Like we don't even realize the dishonesty that's involved, in to ourselves, like, and then
Yep.
it's exhausting. It's exhausting.
One thing I did know is I built this trust relationship with Kevin, and I knew when I pressed send on that email, I knew the jig
Yes.
was up because I knew that Kevin would never let me off the hook.
Right.
Like I knew that was the one-way street. I didn't know what it looked like. I was
Hmm.
completely afraid. I couldn't imagine what it was going to be like to have dinner without wine.
Hmm.
Um, like, I was afraid of what my life would be without alcohol. I didn't realize that for many years, but
Sure.
um, so we get to the coaching session the next day, and Kevin asked me a couple things about my drinking. Um, it turns out that at his summer place in Washington State, where he went every summer, there was kind of like communal fire pits, and he would sit around, and he'd met a person with 20 years in 12-step recovery that he talked to many
Hmm.
times
Hmm.
about his journey and 12-step recovery. So Kevin coached me to go to a meeting,
So
and
he
I
was already in 12-step
well,
recovery.
Kevin wasn't, but
He
like
wasn't,
he
but
had
his friend was.
but a summer friend, right, who
Okay.
sat around the campfire with him.
Hmm.
So he knew something about you know uh, 12-step recovery, and he coached me to go. And I had a really huge aversion. I don't know where that aversion came from. I
Sure. Some
you
people
know
do. Hmm.
um, I think probably it's just the stigma of alcoholism, and still that
Sure.
vision.
Yes,
It's
absolutely.
a guy with
Definitely
a
there.
raincoat and a paper bag, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so I committed to him to go to a meeting by that Friday. And being the overachiever that I am, that afternoon I went online and I had a technical networking event and presentation that I was attending downtown that I knew finished at 8 or a little before. So I looked online, and lo and behold, at 8:30 there was going to be a meeting. There was going to be a quarter of a block off the main road. I would be driving down to go home.
Hmm. Oh,
So the universe once again
just lined it right up for you.
just like I honestly, in my heart of hearts, the universe put Kevin in my path so I could get sober. Like
That's
that's
wonderful.
what I
Yeah.
truly believe.
Yeah.
Um, and
So often there's that pivotal person that, you trust enough or that's just placed right in front of you at exactly the right time that
yeah,
you're going to go ahead and
yeah, and he was it.
get
He
you to
was
where
the
you need to
first.
be.
Kevin was the first person in the world I admitted I had a drinking problem to.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
And this particular meeting was in a legion. Legions are like social venues with bars for veterans. So I walked
Okay.
in the front
Oh, yeah,
door,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
and the doors to the bar are open, and there's beers on two or three tables, and I just stand there like. And then a couple of people going to the meeting, they had that sixth sense of, this deer caught in the headlights, and they said, "Oh, are you looking for a meeting? Go down the hall and up the stairs." And I
Okay.
turned right and I went down the hall and I went up the stairs, which I later learned actually happened to have exactly 12 steps. Coincidentally. um, and there was like, kind of a back social room, and then, the meeting in another room. So I
Mm-hmm.
kind of hung out in the back, and two young ladies came out and welcomed me and were just so, so nice to me. Um, In fact, they probably had the service position greeter, but rather than
Right.
waiting for me to come to them, they came to me. And
Mm-hmm.
I did end up kind of sitting at the end of one row, but halfway up. And at
Yeah.
that time in the meeting, three-quarters of the way through, they asked, is there anyone new who would like to stand and introduce themselves? And I sat on my hands and I sat on my hands. And then after 15 or 20 seconds, which seemed like about 5 minutes, I stood
Mm-hmm.
up and I said, "I'm David, I'm an alcoholic."
Mm-hmm.
And I think for the first time, I admitted my truth. And I
That's
didn't really
really
know what
big.
it
Yeah.
meant. I don't
Sure.
think I really understood what it meant, but I did it. Um,
Sure. It's a real, you spoke to the fear. And I think that to listeners, I would imagine whoever's not there yet, that is one of the biggest fears. I remember how could I possibly live without, having wine at dinner? How could I possibly go here and not drink that? I mean, it just was so ingrained in my life, as such a part of it. To imagine not doing it anymore is just seems almost impossible.
yeah, I mean, how do you have a
How is
birthday
that going to
party
be?
with no booze? Like,
Sure.
just on and
All
on
those
and on,
first, a
right?
wedding,
Yeah,
and it's funny how when you walk into that American Legion or whatever it was, and you had mentioned seeing the beers, like fast forward now to today, you could probably walk in there, wouldn't think anything of it, just walk right
yeah,
past them, get to your room. But that initial first couple steps, there's that initial maybe first 6 months, first year, it's so like precarious, just
yeah,
walking through life, trying not to violate your newfound sobriety. But then, the possibility is it becomes your way of life, not drinking. And all of those initial fears, they're just gone. So we're existing in a world that's a drinking world, and we're completely navigating it successfully without even
yes,
wanting, so that's the real miracle of it all. That's just so available to millions of people,
it
if they can
is.
get
And
past that first step of fear.
and
Yeah.
that particular meeting, I kept going to, and a couple of weeks later, I made it my home group, and I just recently celebrated 15 years sober.
Well, congratulations. That's
Th-
amazing.
Thank you very much, and it's still my home group. And
Wow.
after COVID, we couldn't meet there anymore for a meeting. The
Hmm.
meeting had been in that legion for about 40 years, um,
Oh, well, okay.
and uh, and just changes at the legion. Just
Did you move it to online? Has it been
no,
changed?
we moved it to online during COVID, but we've moved it back to a physical location. But
Okay, great.
it's not in the Legion anymore. And of course, as I gained time in sobriety, I was often tickled that, my home group meeting, because, sometimes there'd be music downstairs.
Sure.
And it's like, you sometimes hear the music come through the floor, and a whole bunch of us would giggle because
Hmm.
it's like, what are the odds that you're having a 12-step meeting above a bar,
Right, right,
right?
right. And
I
too,
mean,
it reminds me of I don't know if you've ever been to a 12-step meeting where they're talking about some people are talking about drinking, and someone says, "Well, I can't come here. It just reminds me of drinking."
mm,
And I've heard that too, and I maybe I felt that a time or two, but that's not generally the overall feel of those places. So if
yeah, for
that's a
me, it was
feeling for
more like,
anybody,
yeah, it actually helped because it was like, I can practice a program so well and stay
Yes.
sober, that I'm okay being, I'm okay with the irony of having a meeting over top of a bar,
Of a
and
bar, right?
I'm not bothered by it. Um,
hmm
so I wanted to spend more time on kind of what happened after. So
Please, yeah.
I did throw myself into the program. Within a few weeks, I found a private men's step group
hmm
that meets weekly. And I meet with that. I missed the meeting last night because Carolee and I were busy where we are. We're currently away in Mexico for a little bit.
hmm
But it's quite unusual that, and half of the group I meet with weekly were there when I came in
Oh,
15 years
okay.
ago. And those men showed me how to cry. They showed me how
hmm
to express emotions. They
hmm
shared with me their vision and how they came to an understanding of a power greater than themselves.
hmm
So that was very important in my recovery to have all of that modeling and to have that experience in a men's only group.
Sure. hmm
So that's been really important. I've worked the steps in AA multiple times. And 5 years ago, I started with adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families. And
hmm
I've done their 3 workbooks. I just finished last year, the Loving Parent Guidebook. And that has been just another massive like leap forward. Um,
hmm
but if we go back to entrepreneurism and kind of my career journey, so now I'm
Sure.
sober. I keep working with Coach Kevin, and over a period of years, I land a few gigs, usually in senior sales and marketing roles, but where I'm working directly with entrepreneur friends of mine.
hmm
So I worked with a friend of mine in the Ottawa Valley who I'd known for 30 years. I worked with
Okay.
him for a year, and I'd spend 3 weeks in Vancouver and 1 week at the headquarters in the Ottawa Valley. And I went to a lot of rural meetings in the Ottawa Valley, which are
Wow.
they're a little different,
Sure.
but still good, strong recovery. And
hmm
then I got a senior position as VP of marketing for this company in Vancouver in the telematics business. So that's where you take a piece of hardware that's bolted to a car or a truck and it tracks it in real time. And
Okay.
then fleet managers can use information that comes from there to manage their fleets better, to know where their vehicles are.
hmm
It was publicly traded, like 35 million a year business. Um,
Wow.
and I came out of that in 2014, and I realized that I never wanted to prove to anyone again that I could work hard. Like I worked as hard in those 3 years as maybe I did ever in my
Mm.
working career. And I was in my like mid 50s.
Okay.
And so, it turns out that I have a taskmaster spirit that lets me get a lot done, but it
Uh-huh.
also makes me work very hard. And so part of
Sure.
the personal growth through working steps in all my programs and therapy work is trying
hmm
to be aware of and, parent my taskmaster spirit, like
hmm
let them loose when it really helps me. But at other times it's like, oh, I don't need you right now. and and so working with Coach Kevin, I made the decision that I wanted to give to the gifts to other entrepreneurs that Kevin had given to me. And so I made the
Oh,
decision to become a business coach.
okay.
And I took my coach training with the Coach Training Institute, which I still think is one of the best coach training organizations in the world. I wrote my book, Wind in Your Sails, Vital
hmm
Strategies That Accelerate Your Entrepreneurial Growth, which is a book targeted to entrepreneurs, especially owner founders who only ever had one business, kind of targeted to them. Once you kind of roll through a few businesses,
Uh-huh.
your experience kind of multiplies. Um, and every chapter of the book starts with a sailing analogy,
Wow. Yeah.
why it's called Wind in Your Sails. And a third of the book are case studies of other entrepreneur friends of mine.
Oh,
So a
great.
third of the
Yeah. That's
content
interesting.
is not my hard-won wisdom, but other people's
Oh, great.
hard-won wisdom. And so I started down this coaching path. So I'm a business coach, and I also facilitate strategic planning using
hmm
that one-page strategic plan that I mentioned
Yeah.
early in our.
Yes.
It turns out I've specialized in that, and my former coach Kevin also is one of the world's best experts in that template and that
Wow.
framework. So
hmm
I learned a lot from him, and I've been facilitating. with that framework for 9 years now. Kevin stopped doing one-on-one coaching because he wanted to focus more on, like, when I facilitate and he facilitates, it's always the entrepreneur and their senior management team. And so Kevin stopped doing one-on-one coaching so we could focus more on that.
Mm-hmm.
And introduced me to his coach, Nan O'Connor in Atlanta,
Wow.
who I've worked with for 7 years now. We just celebrated last month.
Oh, wow.
A very different kind of relationship. And again, each person was perfect in the time I was in,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, and then Nan, kept kind of prodding me a little bit, because she just, we'd get on some, I'm coming, say I'm talking about my upcoming cake or something,
Right.
Right, with her. And she just kept telling me how pure my energy was around like when I talked about it, and how no matter what question she asked me, and especially from a business perspective, and but it didn't matter, like whatever she asked, I always had like a ready answer, which mostly come out of my 12-step program, but my experience. And so I guess about 3 years ago, maybe slightly longer, I decided to break my anonymity and recorded a whole bunch of videos and got much more public, started doing podcasts like this, became much more active about trying to find entrepreneurs who are challenged with alcoholism or addiction, who'd like to have some coaching. And it turns out naturally, even before I did that, I attracted a couple people, it turned out, that had problems. And then some people have approached me because I've been on podcasts like this and said, I listened to you on such and such a podcast, and I've got 4 years of recovery and clean and sober. And, I have the business I'm running, and I'd like some help.
Yeah. Well, I really commend you for that, because I know, one, that it is hard if you have been privately working your program of recovery. To break your anonymity is a large feat. It's a process, and it's not always easy to do. But it speaks volumes about you. And I love that what she had said, you had pure energy about it. Because oftentimes that's like really what we're giving. And, I believe that about you. Just having met you for a short time, your humility about all of the successes that you've had in business paired with your recovery really comes through. And I think one of the benefits, we are in such a digital world right now, and there are so many people who are interested in becoming an entrepreneur, but they don't know how or what the steps are. And I think I love that strategic planning that you talked about, because some people can go on for years and not get ahead. And what you're essentially saying is, wow, in this one-page strategic planning, we can facilitate that and get that started so much quicker. And I think when you pair that with active or recovered alcoholics and addicts, we already have this high performance, get it done. And it's just a good combination. There's so many people who are so highly successful that have recovered. And to pair that with one of the biggest growing platforms out there, it's a really great combination.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I like the one-page plan is that it also, the financial metrics are matched up with the actual what you're going to do, like your goals. And like, the level of financial literacy is still a real challenge. Like, I'm working with a couple young guys. They're like in their late 20s. They started business when they were 18. They're one of Canada's largest custom t-shirt producers.
Oh, wow.
But I've had to do, a lot of work around financial literacy, and like them understanding, as I tell them, it's like, it's not about the numbers in the financial statement. It's about what the numbers mean to your business, and that's a big, huge step.
Sure.
And also I worked with entrepreneurs who don't really understand how much money they're making or not making. And I'm
correct.
like,
Yes.
Revenue is ego.
Right.
Profit is about what it's all about. You'd be better off having lower revenue if you can make more money,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
So
Because it's the
yeah,
making money is the whole
absolutely.
point.
Right.
um,
Right.
and then,
Yeah. And just to have such a good background in that.
so that's just pure business coaching. But then the alcoholism piece is like, how do you go to networking events? I mean, some of it is just pure like 12-step recovery stuff, but it's just I can help from an entrepreneurial point of view.
Yeah.
Like when you go to networking events, like always have a drink in your hand, even if it's a glass of water, because
Right.
people will
Right.
come up and offer to get you a drink,
Yeah.
right? And they'll ask a
Sure.
lot of questions if you have a drink in your hand. Do you have an exit strategy? Even today, like I still
Excellent.
occasionally get triggered.
Hmm.
Um, I'm currently living and working in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, and I would be lying if I didn't say occasionally walking down the Malecon and looking at all of those drinks on all of those
Hmm.
tables, my brain doesn't go, I think we should sit down and order a drink. Like, right? Uh,
Right.
so, what if you're at a networking event and that happens? Like,
Hmm.
what is and especially if you're there with your spouse, like, have you
Sure.
talked to your spouse? Have you formulated what the exit strategy is going to be?
Yeah.
And I work with entrepreneurs who are in like super high end sales. Like, so if you're doing a $500,000 or $1 million deal, like typically the CEO, when you're getting close to closing, is going to fly down to wherever the customer is. And there's going to be meetings and then probably a big dinner with, the higher ups and the bosses of the boss, maybe the chief
Hmm.
financial officer, maybe even the CEO. Um,
Hmm.
and one of my clients a few years ago, who isn't an alcoholic, but he went down for one of these things because that's the
Hmm.
kind of business he's in. And he said, David, like, is it normal to like everyone have 2 drinks before dinner and a bottle of wine each? And I said, well, in that situation, that is normal, and I would call that alcoholic drinking. That's 7 drinks per person nonstop,
Sure. Hmm.
right? I can't
Right.
tell you whether any of them are alcoholics. I can tell you it's alcoholic drinking. Um, and so I coach people with like, so how do you get, if you need to be in those situations, how do you handle the booze if you don't want to?
Great.
Including this particular individual, because he wanted to drink less and he didn't
Hmm.
want to feel forced into having to drink with everyone.
Right.
And
Right.
right.
Yeah. And I think, too, with you, you have a strong 12-step recovery um, program. However, a lot of people are not going that don't go that route, but have problem drinking, or they talk about gray area drinking, or are sober curious, and they have all these different names on it now in the digital realm. So if they're coming in and they're wanting to navigate that, but don't have the backing of the support of the community, the 12 step, you coming in and being an entrepreneur coach and having that as your background is so helpful, because they're getting both of that and they're
Yeah.
able to navigate situations and those exit strategies, and just so small, but such a good pre-planned, bring your own vehicle, like have a way to leave, have something in your hand, like those. It's so smart, so simple, but it just kind of takes that whole thing off of you, and you can just
Yeah.
walk in. That whole, hey, what are you going to have to drink? That is that my drink? Just keep it in your hand. Just these
Right.
simple little strategies. You don't want to take a sip of something that's not yours, and violate everything. But yeah, so I think it's a
And
great
one thing
combination for success.
I do have to be careful of as a business coach and someone in recovery is like sometimes the subject has kind of got borderline where I've had to say to clients, look, if you want me to be your sponsor, I'll be your sponsor. But in which case, I cannot be your business coach.
Sure, sure. I could see
Like,
that. Hmm.
right?
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely. Absolutely.
so
You
it's
know,
your choice, like, which is basically everything I do in coaching. I try and make the client's choice.
hmm
But I've had to say that now in every case, the person's decided, no, I need your business expertise more. I can find someone
yeah,
else to do
yeah.
the recovery
Sure.
piece,
Okay.
right?
So you give
Um,
them a choice.
but I
So
give them a
let me
choice.
ask you,
Then, yeah, and then I say
go
on a
ahead.
given call, like we spent half of this call on recovery, and let's move it on to another topic,
Great. Right.
right?
Right. Great.
You
Yeah,
had a
I think it's
question.
an excellent combination. Yeah, sure. So we talked a lot about business. I think it's such an incredible strategy you have for coaching future entrepreneurs. How has you being alcohol free enhanced your family? Because you had made that choice to do homeschooling on the Mediterranean with your wife and your kids. So, as a dad, a wife, how has that enhanced your family life?
So, I mean, I'm much more present with my kids. I now have two grandkids. I'm very thankful I can be 100% with them. And I'm not, I mean, I think I was there and present 80% of the time.
Uh-huh.
My wife and kids, because family is really, really important to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't 100%, right? And it was
Mm-hmm.
always in the way. And I did things like drunk driving with my children in the vehicle, right? That was some of the early amends that I owned. But if we can, we're kind of getting close to the end of time, and I'd like to wrap up with a bigger story about family, if I could.
Absolutely.
So when I started, like, about how I grew up, I was conceived in Calgary, and then I was relinquished for adoption in Edmonton.
Yes.
After 9 years of sobriety and after 60 years of life, I decided that I would look into my birth families. And I had to do a lot of personal growth work because I was still like codependent with my mother and too worried about what her opinion or thought would be and like hurting her. And I had to get to a point of my mom is an adult and I need to do what's right for me. And if it doesn't work for her, that's her issue, not my issue.
Okay.
So there was quite a bit of personal growth to get to that spot.
Sure.
And I found them. And
you did.
I did. I found both my maternal and paternal. It was a teenage pregnancy, and then afterwards they went their separate ways and they had separate families. So I have two half sisters and three half brothers. And my birth father and my three half brothers are all bigger than me. And I'm like 6'2", 240 pounds with a 46-inch chest. Like if you stand next to me, you're going to go, you're a big dude. And then, and then if you see my brother stand next to me, you're going to be like, oh, you come from giants. But I want to talk about the first person I reached out to 5 years ago this month was my birth mother. And, I explained why I was calling, and her name is Terry Ridley. Ridley is my maternal family name. And she said, I don't know what you're talking about. So denial.
Okay.
Then I said, well, I looked through the papers that Alberta Adoption Registry Services gave me, and she just interrupted me. Those damn people, they never should have given you any information. So she's now blaming this organization for the topic that like 30 seconds ago she said she knew nothing about.
Right.
And then she said, I want nothing to do with you.
Oh, wow.
And that hurt.
Sure.
And, others eventually reminded me that my birth mother doesn't even know who I am, so she can't be rejecting me. She's rejecting the experience of having me. Well, it didn't feel like that, right? But, I went for a long walk. It was a beautiful February day, and I called my coach, I called my sponsor, and then an hour later, Carolee called me and said, do you want to still be alone? Are you ready for some company? And I said, another half hour walking, I'll be at the Cilia Hotel. Why don't you meet me in half an hour there? And like I was ready then to share it with her.
Okay.
But the beautiful thing there, the walk was put me back in nature, which is one of the ways I connect with my higher power. And I had just had so many tools to process it.
Yeah.
So I could take on the emotional burden, but then, by bedtime that night, I had a good night's sleep. Like, I wouldn't say I was whole about it, but.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that.
And then I got two more pieces. I'll go pretty quick because I know we're almost out of time.
It's okay.
So a few days later, I emailed my sister, and I'd warned my birth mother I was going to do this. And she didn't want me to, but I was still told her I was going to do it. And then about a week after that, my younger sister wrote me a beautiful letter welcoming me to the Ridley family.
Wow.
And came as an email, but it was actually a letter. And, I've subsequently built relationships with both of them. I've built relationships with my uncle, who was only 7 when I was born. He didn't even know that Terry was pregnant. And with Terry's older sister, who's my Aunt Marty. So I built relationships with all these people. And last April, my elder sister called me and said, Terry's just been admitted to hospital with a brain tumor, and she doesn't have very
Wow.
long to live. It was like Saturday, Sunday, I talked to my sisters. Monday, I flew out to Calgary. And Tuesday morning, my uncle called me and invited me to the hospital. And all of my Ridley
Wow.
family wanted me there. And at that point, my birth mother was unconscious, so she couldn't object to my presence.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and So there I was in the presence of my birth mother for the first time since I was born.
Oh, that's an incredible story. Mm-hmm.
And, we just all sat, those, both my sisters and my nephew and my Uncle Jim's daughter and his granddaughter, who was only at that point about a month old, were all there, and Aunt Marty. And 2 hours later, Terry took her last breath and passed away.
Wow.
And we had shed a lot of tears. I don't know if I was shedding tears for Terry or what was never to be, or just for the Ridley family, who were all hurting.
Mm-hmm.
And after we all kind of settled down, my Uncle Jim came to me and said, David, do you want a picture with Terry? And my brain went, no effing way. Like, there's still resentment there. I still have work to do. But my loving parent from ECA said, David, if you don't take this picture, you'll never have a picture of you and your mom. And so I said, yes, Jim, I'd like you to take the picture. And I kneeled down on one knee next to her in the hospital bed. And Jim took the picture. And a minute or so later, I leaned over and kissed her on the cheek and wished her well. And the day after, my uncle and my two sisters went to where she was living. She was living on her own, but in an assisted living facility. And there was, and they had told me that she was an alcoholic, but I didn't know if she was not like a practicing alcoholic right to the end. But there was an open bottle of rye in the kitchen, and there was a case of 12 in the closet. So I think that she probably was drinking a bottle of rye a day right up to the very end. I'll never know, but
from the very beginning, when you said you were adopted, I was thinking of that genetic piece, that genetic predisposition, if that was going to play a part for you. And so it sounds like it did.
Yeah, and on my paternal side, my aunt's a recovering alcoholic. And my birth
So you were connected to her in more of a way than you thought, perhaps.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Well, and my maternal brother, Gary, died in 2015 of cirrhosis of the liver as a direct result of his alcoholism. And I didn't connect till 2018. So I never had an opportunity to meet him. So,
and just a testament to all the reconciliation and the restoration that happens in recovery, to have your entire family in that room after reconnecting with them is really quite incredible.
An amazing, amazing experience. And I've also really built strong relationships with my birth father and with my paternal brothers as well. I put a lot of time and energy into doing that. So, I have my family of origin, and my mom's still alive, 96. I try and get out to Edmonton and see her every 6 months. I talk to her every couple of weeks. I talk to her on the weekend. And my brother and sister, still live in Edmonton. So I have this very large constellation of family.
It sounds like.
So
that's wonderful.
So I wanted to end on that story. That's not the business piece, but it is the recovery piece. It is that work, doing the work that is suggested to us, and that personal growth. Because if I hadn't done the personal growth, I couldn't have got to that point where I think I was ready to do it.
Sure. Could you just leave us with listeners with, if they're struggling right now with building a business, with being in that whole work world, and thinking they may have a problem with alcohol, what would you say to them?
There's hope.
Exactly.
There's hope is what I tell people. And the other piece is you can't do it alone. I just, the brain that gets addicted, that is in alcoholism. Well, look at me. Look at my story. I needed Coach Kevin, because the brain that got me to be an alcoholic was never going to get me out of there.
Sure.
And the fact that I can walk down the Malecon and Puerto Vallarta and still be triggered, I mean, that alcoholic part of my brain's still there.
Right.
Right.
So you need that. Absolutely.
Yeah. And
Excellent.
that's why I still attend meetings and, I stay close to the program because I know the alcoholic part of me wants to kill me. So,
absolutely.
But if you're suffering, you don't have to. Like, there is hope there. And whether it's 12-step, there's lots of other programs. Like, this is the one that really worked for me. Find your solution. But again, don't do it alone. Find someone who can help you.
Thank you so much for being here today.
If you
want to further, thank you. And if you want to further connect with David J. Greer or obtain a copy of his book, Wind in Your Sails, visit www.coachdjgreer. That is coachdjgreer.com. Thank you for tuning into the Sober Living Stories podcast. If you have been inspired, consider subscribing and sharing with anyone who could use hope in their lives. Remember to stay tuned for more inspiring stories in the episodes to come. To view our featured author of the month or to become a guest yourself, visit www.jessicastepanovic.com.